Hello, folks. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Julie Evans. I'm the CEO of a nonprofit group called Project Tomorrow. It's so nice to have all of you here with me today. Just so that I know a little bit about who's here with me, do we have some educators that are here in the audience? Lovely, nice to have you here. How about some folks from the vendor community, the industry community? Nice. Any media folks here? Any higher ed folks? How about some nonprofits or researchers? Great, it's nice to have you all here with me. So we're going to be talking about so many products, so much data. What are the types of real metrics that educators are using? We're going to be looking at some findings from the Speak Up Research Project for Digital Learning, some of the very latest research that we have that is going to inform our conversation today. Now, before we get started, I know that sometimes the conversation around data can make you feel like this. Are we all going to scream? Don't worry, I'm going to be very gentle. We're going to take a look at some data findings. But the real key understanding here is that quite often in the education space today, our education leaders feel like this because of so many products and so much data that they're dealing with. So two big questions that educators tell us that they have concerning digital products. One is how to determine the quality of those digital products. And then the second one is how to meaningfully evaluate or measure the impact or the return on investment. So those are two stumbling type questions that educators often have. So we're going to be tackling both of those here in this 25-minute session. But I want to first find out what you think about this. So we're going to do a little quick audience poll to see where you come out on these types of questions. So the first question is this one. What attributes is most important when evaluating the quality of a digital product for classroom usage? Do you think it's that the product needs to have multiple reading levels, be research-based, demonstrate student achievement results, include teacher training, or have been created by a practicing teacher? So we're going to do this the old-fashioned kindergarten way and just raise our hands. So who thinks it is that the product needs to have multiple reading levels? How about be research-based? Okay, a few folks. Demonstrate student achievement results. That seems to be a family favorite. Includes teacher training. A couple folks. Created by a practicing teacher. Okay, so hold on to those responses. We're going to get back to you on what that data looks like as we get into this. The second question, this one was polled of district administrators. What metric do you think is most effective for measuring the impact or return on investment of digital initiatives? So do you think it's feedback from teachers, student achievement results, level of engagement, students' level of engagement, observations in the classroom, or feedback from students? So again, we'll do it the kindergarten way. Who thinks it's feedback from teachers? Okay. Student achievement results, another family favorite. Students' level of engagement in learning, couple folks. Observations in the classroom, and feedback from students. So we have kind of a mixed bag on this one. Again, stay tuned. We're going to give you the results of that as we get into this. So this question about what is the state of digital learning in our K-12 schools and districts is a perplexing one for many folks. What we do at Project Tomorrow is that we conduct the annual Speak Up Research Project, which endeavors to answer that question with data. So just to tell you a little bit about Speak Up, it is an annual research project where we poll K-12 students, teachers, parents, and administrators on their thoughts and views about digital learning. We take that data and we share it at wonderful conferences such as this, as well as informing national, state, and local policymakers. It is the largest collection of authentic feedback from K-12 students, teachers, and parents on digital learning. So if nothing else today, I hope that you learn that you can come and visit us at tomorrow.org for any sort of research you're looking at around digital learning. So some of the big picture trends from our research include some of these. You know, this idea of personalized learning is obviously very important and one that lots of folks are talking about, particularly when it is implemented through different types of learning models, blended classrooms, flipped classrooms, mobile classrooms. That's obviously driving increased criticality around internet connectivity, both at home and at school. We also see that increasingly folks are interested, particularly policymakers and governance organizations, about understanding the real outcomes associated with digital learning. But in many ways, the conversation around digital learning is truly just a metaphor for understanding what's happening in our larger education space, this transformation of the education process to be more student-centered, to be more focused on outcomes. Quite often, what I will tell people in the education space is that the current state of digital learning is a little bit like this quote from Suzanne Collins, the author of Mockingjay. Knowing it and seeing it are two different things. We may, in a K-12 school, see something and think we know what we're seeing, where in fact we're looking at it through a very particular lens, our own lens that we bring into this conversation. It's a little bit like this image. So some of us here in this room may look at this image and see a face with deep-set eyes, a high forehead, a strong nose. Some of us may see a woman in a fur coat walking through leaves. Some of us here in this room may see both images. Some of us might not see either image. The state of digital learning today in our K-12 schools is like that. We're seeing things through different lenses, and we cannot assume that we're all seeing and knowing what we are seeing from the same perspective. That's where the Speak Up data has a leg up, and it gives our K-12 educators, as well as those from industry that are interested in learning more about digital learning, a perspective that's based on data, not based on anecdote or mythology. So let's get into this. We're looking at data that was collected this past fall from about 406,000 respondents nationwide. So the number one issue that's waking up our school superintendents across the country is this thorny topic of how to close the achievement gap. Now, superintendents tell us that there's three key ways that they're approaching the closing of the achievement gap: trying to make their teachers more effective, integrating college and career-ready skills into the curriculum, and leveraging technology more effectively. We find, however, though, that this is not an even pattern of adoption in our K-12 schools. And in fact, we have used our data to come up with this Speak Up Maturity Growth Model that looks at the implementation adoption process in K-12 schools across the country. We find that certain initiatives are very mature at this point. So the idea of using videos within instruction, the idea of students taking online tests is a more mature adoption process. We see a majority of schools that tell us that they have done that. Some of these initiatives are just developing. We're seeing a smaller percentage of schools, for example, that are offering online classes for students or even online professional development for their teachers. And then some of the more emerging ones are discussed a lot at conferences such as this, but the actual implementation in our K-12 schools is still lagging behind. However, it's in those emerging areas that we see high growth potential, and it's where the schools themselves say that they anticipate a high degree of growth in those emerging areas, whereas the mature areas have a much slower pace of growth at this point. In terms of subject areas, principals tell us that they see the best utilization of digital tools in math, English reading, and science. Those are high premium, high impact areas, but that's where they currently see the best implementation at this time. So the value proposition for administrators is something to definitely take into consideration as well. So we ask administrators about where they see the benefits or the value proposition for using technology within the learning process. And they talk to us about concepts such as student engagement, the fact that it improves the quality or the relevancy of the instructional materials. It's also important that they look at it through the lens of providing a way to enable personalized learning for their students. And I also think it's particularly interesting that the principals say that it makes their school feel innovative, and that actually has a competitive edge for them. They also look at it within the lens of preparing those students for the future. So making sure that students have the right skills. So here we see that the data from district administrators and school administrators shows us that about 2/3 of those leaders believe that's extremely important for the effective use of technology to be embedded within instruction. But we also see something else interesting from this data. When we poll teachers, we see that they value the use of technology, but not at the same intensity level as the administrators. In fact, only 44%, Only 44% of teachers viewed the effective use of technology as extremely important. They view it as important, but not necessarily at the same level that the administrators do. So that then begs the question, so what's holding back greater adoption of digital learning? Well, the administrators identified for us 3 key barriers to the effective use of digital learning that's happening. One is motivating and training teachers to be able to use the technology effectively. That motivation really has to do with changing some of the attitudes or valuations that the teachers have about this. Providing the infrastructure to support high-impact usage and determining the quality of product. This plethora of product that is in the marketplace is one of those double-edged sword components. It gives a lot of choice, but it makes it difficult to determine what is the most appropriate for any given classroom and also what might possibly be of the highest quality. So let's take a look at this quality conversation to get started. So how do educators look at determining quality of digital learning products and tools? We've actually been asking that question of administrators for many years. And it basically comes down into this sort of simple statement. School principals are looking at quality through 2 lenses. One has to do with product features. The other one has to do with trustworthiness of the sources of those products. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into this. In terms of the product features, the types of things that administrators tell us are very important for determining quality are these type of features. It's aligned to the curriculum. It does have those multiple reading levels. The content is current. In that sense, it is updated all the time. It also can be modified by the teacher. There's also a rich data set that can be mined to understand the personalization component. You also can see here that there are differences between elementary school principals, middle school principals, and high school principals. So we can't necessarily think of this as a monolith when we think about the administrators that are making these decisions. We really have to think about what type of school they are addressing. In terms of the source attributes, these are also a little bit differentiated by the elementary school, middle school, and high school levels. In this case, the content is research-based, is the primary source that identifies trustworthiness. Also, in terms of theirs, where you see the student achievement results come in, and the fact that it was created by a practicing teacher also gets high marks from the principals. So remember, that was one of our audience poll questions. And so I had asked you what you thought the key attribute was going to be. Now, from this list, what was interesting is that, in fact, it was 84% of administrators that said that multiple reading level was important. We have been polling on this for several years, and a couple years ago, that was not even on the radar screen. But understanding the importance of literacy and understanding the fact that we have a wide range, a wide spectrum of reading levels within all of our classrooms makes this even more important. But you can see right behind there is research-based and then student achievement results. Okay, so let's flip over to the second question, which is about measuring impact and return on investment. So administrators talk to us about 5 key essential conditions that need to be in place if they're looking for a successful digital learning initiative. They obviously need to have the funding, the money in place. They need to have technology capacity, which is the infrastructure, as well as devices and product, whatever that might be. They need to have sound policies, particularly policies around either protecting student data or protecting the students. They also are looking for parent buy-in and teacher buy-in as other key essential components. They tell us that increasingly they are using data to make decisions. In fact, 54% of school principals told us they're regularly using data on making budgetary and purchasing decisions. So that takes you right back to looking at some of those student achievement results. 87% of school principals told us they're regularly using data to develop school improvement plans as well. So that brings us, of course, to our question here. Which metric is the most effective for measuring the impact or return on investment of your digital initiatives? So what we actually heard here was that the students' level of engagement in learning was #1 for school and district administrators across the country. That was also true when we disaggregated that based on rural, urban, or suburban communities, high poverty communities, as well as across all the different ages of their students that they're serving. So that idea of student engagement being first. You can see student achievement results is up there, but a much lower, significantly lower percentage than the student engagement. So you might be thinking the same thing I'm thinking at this point, which is that there's an interesting mix here of qualitative measures as well as quantitative measures. Really the only quantitative measure that came up anywhere near the top 10 was the student achievement results. Most of the measures are qualitative. How are we looking at student engagement? How are we looking at classroom observations to determine the efficacy of our digital learning initiatives? We're looking for feedback from students. We're looking for buy-in from teachers. Those are all qualitative measures associated with it. So we've determined a number of reasons why those metrics at this point are mostly qualitative. It is difficult in an education setting to determine impact and return on investment, particularly because it is difficult to isolate the particular intervention and to be able to see if that intervention is the driving factor, is it the determining variable in the mix of things. It also is that there is generally a lack of expertise in terms of how to evaluate impact quantitatively in a K-12 environment. And then the other one that I think is particularly interesting here is this idea around this space is still evolving and maturing. Whereas we looked at some of the digital learning initiatives and saw that they were mature in terms of their implementation, we still see so much that is just highly dynamic at this point. And so it is hard to sort of plant a flag in the ground and say, this is the type of metric that we're going to use as it is still evolving, as it is building along. To give you an example, for many years, Project Tomorrow has been involved with doing evaluation efficacy studies around different types of digital initiatives. And a couple years ago, we were doing a study around mobile learning in the classroom. We were provided by the school with their principal's observation tool that he, in that particular case, it was a male principal, used in all of his observations in the classroom. That tool was totally ineffective in using in a mobile classroom. It was based on a traditional stand and deliver teacher model, not a model where students are self-directing their learning, working on projects, doing collaborative facilitation of projects. It just didn't work. We had to create a specific observation tool to do the classroom observations as part of our efficacy study because of that environment. So there's a lot that still needs to be developed here. The bottom line is that we are still determining the right lens to go forward to identify and evaluate digital product for the classroom, just like the image that we looked at. There's a lot more data, folks, that's available on our website at tomorrow.org. I was able today to just give you a little bit of a snippet in terms of thinking about some of these products, but we do have a couple moments left in which we can take some questions from the audience if you're interested. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, Tom.
Have you found some school districts that have been able to justify a better, whether it's ROI or, it seems the question of, is it improving academic performance is so far away from buying a computer. What are schools using to give evidence to the board of a smart buying decision?
So just in case folks couldn't hear the question, Tom was asking about the evidence that school districts are using currently to evaluate what they're looking at. I'm still finding that there is a wide spectrum out there in terms of the ability, the effective ability of school districts to evaluate what they're doing. And unfortunately, many of them are using anecdotal information. So a principal will tell me, well, I know that this particular intervention, it could be the use of mobile devices, it could be a blended learning environment, it could be a piece of digital content that they've brought into the classroom. He said, I know it's working because when I walk in the classroom, the students seem very engaged in the activity. And they're using that as evidence. That obviously is very soft evidence. There are definitely ways that you can measure student engagement, but what's currently happening is that it's mostly anecdotal information. That's where you will see quite often, if you have the opportunity to do it, school boards are looking at evaluation criteria even before they're making purchasing decisions. So how are we going to measure this on the back end to make sure that our investment is the correct investment? That's because they've gotten a lot of presentations from school principals and superintendents that were based on anecdotal information, and they're looking for something more quantitative. So I'm still seeing a lot of qualitative out there in terms of the anecdotes. Yes, sir. So the question was about efficacy studies or evaluation studies on different types of products. So we're engaged in doing some of that work for companies. We do some of that. And there are some different studies that are out there. Studies, again, can be a broad range in terms of whether you are looking at student achievement results or you are looking at some of the more qualitative measures. And every study is a little bit different. We're currently working on a study right now where we're evaluating 9 blended learning schools in Los Angeles, and we are specifically doing a secondary level data analysis looking at student achievement results. So we are looking at the amount of time that the school has implemented blended learning school-wide, and then how that has resulted in different types of student achievement results. But note that what I said before still holds true for any of these. It is hard to take the technology, whether it is Kahoot or an implementation model, and isolate it so purely that you can say definitively it is this intervention or this product. It is difficult to do that. You can make some assumptions, you can make some statements going forward that you think it's doing this, but there are way too many variables. As I said before, we have been doing some of this evaluation work for a while, and quite often the chief variable that is so difficult to control is actually teacher usage in the classroom. So we can say this is a wonderful intervention and you should use it regularly as part of math instruction or science instruction, but what actually happens in the classroom may vary. And so when we've been doing evaluation studies, we always start with looking at what the usage levels are, because quite often you will see differences in the results based on that. Another question? Yes, sir.
The data suggest who's making the decision. Is it district level, school level, teachers?
Yes. So the question has to do with where is the decision-making authority being implemented at this point. That's a really interesting question. A couple years ago, we were able to see from our study that it looked like there was a shift that was happening from district level. Central offices were coming down into schools and then actually down into the teacher level, particularly around digital content. That was dovetailed in with mobile apps and teachers making decisions about apps. The last 2 years, we're seeing a shift coming back to the central office. And so we're definitely seeing greater consolidation in the district office, the central office, in terms of decision making. That's been driven by a number of different things. There was a study that we did a couple years ago where I interviewed 15 district CIOs and CTOs specifically about this. There was a couple drivers. One has to do with data privacy. Teachers were unwittingly making decisions on product that was violating either what the district policies were or state and federal laws about data privacy. They didn't know any better. It wasn't nefarious. They just didn't know any better. The other thing that was happening is that their decisions were being made even at a school level that was totally sucking up bandwidth in terms of capacity without a consideration for their peers in terms of what was going on. So the districts decided that out of safety concerns, out of enterprise management concerns, decisions needed to come back into the central and district office. So we're seeing that shift. It's a little bit of a wave. Some are still in various levels of that. Any other questions, folks? Well, thank you very much, folks, for joining me here today. There is some information about Speak Up. I hope you will come and visit us at tomorrow.org. It should be a definitive source for you in terms of information about the state of digital learning in our schools and districts today. So thank you very much for joining us.